Hi, everyone. Welcome back to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank. Today, we are tackling one of the most common questions I think I get in my primary care pediatric practice, and that is getting your baby to sleep through the night. This is one of the largest stresses of parents of newborns, new parents, because when your baby doesn't sleep through the night, it often means that parents are not sleeping through the night. And being short on sleep is one of the biggest stressors in adapting to parenthood.
This is one we talk about all the time in pediatric practice, so I'm really excited to see what we come up with. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So, Vivian, why don't we pick up with you telling us your experiences and stories of having a new baby sleep through the night?
Okay, well, as our listeners know, I have 6 children. 2 of them were adopted. So I actually got those children already sleeping through the night. So my experience is with 4 children and getting them to sleep through the night. And I'm not sure everybody knows this, but Sylvia, one of your superpowers is that you are a great sleeper and you can wake up anytime, feed a baby, and go right back to bed and feel like you had a great night's sleep, no
I'm a
matter how
great,
many times you woke up.
I am a great sleeper, and I know that my experience and my stories with my newborns will probably be different than yours.
Yes, yes. But for me, getting an infant to sleep through the night was a big priority for me in my early parenting. So, as such, I was a scheduled feeder, and I can talk more about the logistics of that with the goal of pushing that baby to start giving longer stretches at night, not during the day, holding them to frequent eating during the day until I was starting to get that longer stretch at night. So I was a very scheduled, regimented feeder. And
I think that can be defined as sleep training them to sleep through the night, right?
yes, I was a sleep trainer. I know how to sleep train. And so,
Mhm.
for example, for my first, now this is important, she was 9.5 pounds. So she started off with an advantage of weight because we know as babies gain more weight, they can eat more at a time. They more quickly develop the ability to sleep through the night. But I sleep trained her, and at about 7 to 8 weeks, she was giving me a good 7 to 8 hours at night
Mm,
as a stretch. And it was amazing. And I
that's
had my regimen of this is what we do. And to just give you a taste of it, I would breastfeed her and that would start the clock. That's time 0. I would figure that I was going to feed her for 30 minutes because I really wanted that good breast milk production stimulation. I did 15 minutes per side with a timer. I alternated which side I started with. Again, I'm trying to establish really good breastfeeding routines. This is part of it. I'm trying to establish her eating for longer stretches so that she's very full. And then after she ate, I would keep her awake as best I could and, interact with her. And then as we got closer to that time point to about an hour and a half or so, depending on her age, I would then put her down for a nap while she was awake. So
Mhm.
she's soothing herself to go to sleep. And then I would let her take a nap. And if she woke up at the 2.5 hour mark, I would get her up and feed her. If she didn't, I would wake her up and feed her. So this whole principle, it's more nuanced than that because it changes week to week to week as they're gaining weight. But the whole idea is she's getting a really good feeding while she's the most awake that she is because she just got up from a nap. She is staying awake after the feeding. She's not using the feeding to fall asleep. And then she is going down for her nap while she's awake. So she's already learning this process of self-soothing when she's awake and alone in the crib. And then I am keeping her on a schedule where she's feeding very frequently during the day so that she naturally starts giving me a longer space at night. And it was amazing. And I thought after that, I thought I knew how to do it, right?
Okay, let me get this straight. So you're feeding from the beginning of your feed to the beginning of the next feed, somewhere between 2, no more than 3 hours during the day because you want to feed her more frequently during the day,
Yes.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And
Um,
let me explain really quick. That first week or 2 of life, that's different. I mean, I was still making sure I was waking her up and feeding her frequently, but I'm really talking about once you're past that week or 2 and you can be a little bit more specific in your scheduling. And I scheduled her on the clock. We are
sure.
going to do 2.5 hours. I can tell that you have enough weight to wait the
Yeah.
2.5 hours,
Yeah.
and that's what we're going to do.
And I would just want to highlight a couple of pearls here in your method.
Yeah.
The whole every feed, wake, sleep cycle you're doing is in the order of feed, wake, then sleep.
Yes.
Feed, wake, then sleep, instead of wake, feed to sleep.
Yeah.
And this distinction, it sounds like it's not a big deal, but it actually is quite a big deal. The
Yes.
second thing that I want to commend in your method here is the allowing your baby to fall asleep by herself every cycle.
Yes.
Instead of feeding her to sleep or holding her to sleep and then laying her down gently in the crib and tiptoeing away, she is learning to get from the wake to sleep without you. Right. So I feel like those are, the pearls, the nuance of what you are trying to do and achieve in this type of feed wake cycle.
Yes,
Okay.
and it worked so beautifully, and within 3 weeks, I would say, when we were on that every 2.5 feeding schedule during the day, I mean, I could set the clock to her cues. Her body knew. She would wake up right at that 2.5 mark, be alert, ready to feed. We'd have that good 30-minute feed. My milk supply was in. It was so smooth, and then she'd stay up, and then I'd put her down, and she would fall right to sleep. I mean, I literally could have done it without the clock because her body just knew. It fell
Mhm.
right into that routine and it worked great for both of us.
Okay, so let's hear about the other three.
Yeah, okay. So, had I only had her, I would have thought, okay, I know how to do this. I can teach anyone how to do this. Pat myself on the back. I have figured out the key to getting an infant to sleep through the night. So then I had my second and, very excited this time with some confidence behind me that this is what I'm going to do and we are going to be sleeping through the night. And to make a long story short, from the first day of life, he started screaming at night at around 10 p.m. every night for somewhere between 4 to 6, sometimes 8 hours. And
Goodness.
that continued until he was about 9 months old. So he is going to be a topic for another podcast sometime, which will be colic in the newborn. And everything I did went out the window because nothing would work. And I tried so hard to reverse his days and nights because I would have been fine with him screaming daytime. And it never worked. And I knew all of the tricks in the book and I could not get it to work. But I don't want to derail. But all I will say is that my sleep training, which worked so beautifully for my first, did not work at all for him. And we just had to get through that phase of his colic. And then he became a good sleeper, but it took months. And
Mhm.
thankfully, he is a really sweet, wonderful child, and he's made up for that time. But he knows that he has the reputation in our family of being the most difficult baby by far.
And we were friends at that time and us just getting together here and there. I do remember that actually. He was quite
Yes.
fussy.
But then I went on to have 2 more, and they beautifully sleep trained. Same thing. By 7, 8 weeks, I was getting an 8-hour stretch at night, and during the day, I knew what time I needed to feed them. My body knew, their body knew. It was beautifully scheduled, and it was super smooth.
Right. No, I like that. As you previewed with me, I don't have that much difficulty being woken up and going back to sleep. You so call it, my superpower. It winds up being a strength of mine, and I'm much less regimented because I don't mind continuing to wake up overnight for feeding.
I actually remember you describing that, particularly with your fourth, as this, like, precious one-on-one time in the quiet of the night that you could spend with that newborn.
Special time because it was a time in the middle of the night where it was a one-on-one time that I had with the baby, and it was special to me. So I think depending on what your goals are, it was not a particular goal of mine to get a large stretch of sleep for me and or my child in the middle of the night. So we kind of had a different method that we implemented based on the strengths of me and my husband. So my children were not birthwise as big. So there was more of a requirement for more frequent feeding because they could not feed as much because they were smaller babies. And what we wound up doing as a nursing mom, I didn't really have a schedule. I honestly feel like my story is the complete antithesis of yours, where if the baby was awake, I would just continuously feed, both sides, back and forth until the baby fell asleep.
Oh,
Like,
yes, we're so
yeah,
opposite.
completely different than you. And once the baby was asleep, whether or not it was like 5 minutes on one side, didn't fully feed, if actually the baby fell asleep, then I would put the baby down wherever, on a little mat in the pack and play. And then, obviously I have other kids, taking care of the other kids, changing someone else's diaper. And then if the baby cried, then I would pick up the baby up and feed on the other side until the baby fell asleep again. And then I would put the baby down again. That was my strategy. I actually don't know how often I fed or how much I fed. It was not a scheduled, regimented thing. But come evening time, our other children went to bed a little bit earlier, like 7 o'clock. They were early to bed, early risers. I would feed my baby, the newborn, somewhere around 8 o'clock. And then I would go to sleep. This is the whole me sleeping part where
Mhm.
I could lie down on my carpet right now and fall asleep. I'm a very good sleeper, and when you're a little bit low on sleep, it's even easier for me to fall asleep. So I would feed the baby fully at 8, having just put down other children, hand the baby off to my husband, who would maybe watch some sports or, just hold the baby. That was his job until 11 or 12. So whatever was the mark where the baby could not be soothed in his arms anymore. You
Okay.
know, he would talk about this evening time, that special time he had with the baby.
Yeah.
He would start off by, sitting in a chair with the baby in his arms. And then as the baby is getting hungry and hungrier, he then has to, rock. Then he has to stand. Then he has to walk around the room. He is holding the baby off for as long as he can until he then passes the baby off to me and he goes to sleep. And then I am on for the rest of the night. So that's
Oh.
kind of how we divided that newborn time, where I could probably count on a solid 3 to 4 hour stretch myself, knowing that I didn't have to wake up for the baby at all during that period of time. And that was what set me up to then having this disrupted sleep for the rest of the night.
Mhm, mhm.
So then he would pass the baby off to me, and then it would be my turn. And then I would basically just feed the baby until the baby fell asleep and then put the baby down. And if the baby cried at any interval, then I would just feed again. And that would just be my night.
Okay, so then at what age did they start sleeping through the night?
So that's an interesting question because I don't know when they eventually slept through the night. I want to say somewhere around the 2 to 4 month age, depending on the child. Then the baby, when I fed at 8 o'clock, would just go down. So we would put the baby down at 8 o'clock. And then we began to be able to spend a little bit of time together, in the evening
Mm.
before I went to sleep. And eventually it would go down to 2. Sometimes on a bad night, I'd have to wake up 3 times to feed them overnight. And then they would eventually drop a feed where it was down to 2 feeds a night. And as they got older, closer to the 6, 9 month range, then we were down to 1 wake a night. I was good with that. So that's how our infant feeding naturally evolved during their first year of life.
So, Sylvia, let's transition to practical guidance that we can give to parents encouraging infants to sleep through the night.
I think, first of all, for my practice, I use some general guidelines when I offer advice to parents when they have the newborn and the infant. And typically, one of the biggest concerns of a pediatrician is to make sure that the newborn is gaining weight.
Yes, yes.
All babies after they're born go through a little bit of weight loss from their birth weight as they're losing fluid in those first 48, 72
Mhm.
hours of life. And then what we want to see is that once they start feeding, then the real body weight starts increasing. And there are certain markers of concern for pediatricians in that weight loss period. So it is expected that babies lose some weight initially, but if babies lose more than 10% of their body weight, then it becomes more of a concern for pediatricians. This is too much weight loss. We really need to get the baby gaining some weight from here on out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of upfront newborn recommendations and precautions that I think pediatricians monitor very closely.
Right. And
Right.
even with my sleep training, I think of that first couple of weeks, it's all different.
Right.
You're totally focused on establishing good breastfeeding and helping that baby gain weight. Even my babies that were born at 8.5, 9.5 pounds, I'm still focused on getting them to establish feeding and gaining weight.
Right. And initially, as a rough guideline, there's a minimum number of feeds that we like to see babies do
Mhm.
in a 24-hour period, and that minimum is 8 feeds a day. Now, you could be feeding 10 or 12 or 15 times a day, but the minimum feed number is 8. And when you calculate that in a 24-hour period, then from beginning of feed to next feed, every 3 hours should be a feed.
Yes.
And with your model, if you're pushing, 2.5 during the day, then you could possibly get more like a 4-hour overnight, right?
And again, the 4 hours at night, that infant that has started off at a good weight and is showing good progress with their feeding. Otherwise, in a smaller infant, I might even hold to the every 3 hours at night in
Right.
that first couple of weeks. That's a different process, although you
Yep.
can start to set some patterns that set you up for getting an infant to sleep through the night sooner.
So usually 10 pounds, I tell the parents that they no longer need to set an alarm overnight for that 3-hour mark for feeding. You can let the baby self-regulate and see.
Yes. So as I'm talking to parents, and particularly if I have parents who are interested in sleep training, as we move into that 2 to 4 week mark, which for different babies is going to hit around the time that they're hitting that 10 pounds, then I'm encouraging them hold your feedings to every 2.5 to 3 hours during the day, and then let them go up to 4 hours at night. And then pretty quickly after that, if they're showing good weight gain and things are going well, you can go further at night. But this is a point where a lot of babies will naturally move to an every 3 to 4 hour around the clock feeding. And if you really want to sleep train, then I would encourage holding them to a more frequent during the day so that you're starting to train that longer stretch at night.
So I feel like our recommendations are similar, but with the caveat of knowing that newborn period is very special.
So at this point, let's give some take home points as we think about this sleeping through the night in that infant period.
Sure. So, from the pediatrician's perspective, I want to highlight your baby's sleeping, your baby's feeding, and your baby's weight gain. Those three things go hand in hand during the newborn period. First of all, the pediatrician's biggest concern is gaining weight and then, therefore, feeding enough. And then, once that is established, then the sleeping follows. Also, to reiterate, not to start sleep training your infant until appropriate weight gain has been established. And then that flows into the last point is the importance of having follow-up weight checks either in an individual appointment or in a well child appointment to ensure that the baby is feeding enough and continuing to gain weight.
Right. And as I think about this topic, as with so many topics in parenting, I want parents to have the freedom to think about what works best for them and their baby. So I think you and I have highlighted, I thrived and I still thrive on routine and schedule and predictability. And that in that infant period made me a better parent. Sylvia, you fed entirely baby led, and that worked best for you and was probably less stressful for you than having to worry about what time it was and when the next feeding was. And that made you a better parent. I also want parents to think about their baby. Do you see signs that they're eating really well, that they might be able to sleep train, that they're already showing you that there's no day night reversal, that you're getting those good feedings? And finally, a point that I always like to make with parents is, sleep training is very focused on this regimented schedule and that you put your baby down while they're awake so that they're learning to fall asleep on their own without you. But I do think everybody should have the joy of holding their baby while they're asleep. So this is what you're characterized by, is this schedule and this routine and sleep training, but don't sacrifice the joys of still holding a sleeping baby. Again, find the moments that you can find joy in your parenting, and holding a sleeping baby is one of the most joyful things in parenting.
I like your last point, and I want to reiterate that sleeping and sleep training are often things that parents feel like they need to achieve in order to be good parents. And I want to take the pressure off of parenting, where if your baby is gaining weight, developing normally, if you're enjoying your baby, it's okay that they're not sleeping through the night.
A baby that is gaining weight well and developing well, enough said.
Right.
Let's celebrate that. All of these other things will come to pass at some point.
I think in this 0 to 1 year age baby, what you hear from our testimonials is it's really kind of individualized to what works best for the parent.
What's missing in this discussion is the idea of letting your child cry it out when needed, or
Mhm.
sometimes it's referred to the Ferber method, that graduated extinction. This is a whole podcast in and of itself and something we need to cover because there are parents that are going to be between what you did and what I did that need advice on how to get their infant to sleep through the night.
Right. I do really feel like this Ferber method is kind of in between you and me.
Yeah. So stay tuned, guys. Look for that in an upcoming podcast. We have not forgotten about you and we are going to get there.
Yeah. So next time, look forward to other episodes about how to achieve good sleep in different age periods.
The toddler who is crying at night with the school-age child who doesn't want to sleep alone in their room, the child with ADHD who has difficulty sleeping. These are all different topics for another day. I look forward to talking more about this.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.